Good morning, Noah.
Morning, Laura.
Good to see you.
Very
Where are
nice
you?
to see you too.
Where are you?
I'm I'm in London right now. As you know, I'm starting my PhD at Imperial Business School, and pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. Too sad. I'm sad that you could not come to our workshop, but it's great that we at least can talk, and our school students will see your presentation and the
Mhm.
interview. So, Noah, you talked once at our workshop some years ago about the power of youth in climate policy making. And this is a topic which is again important for our workshop now. And I wanted to ask you, have you made more progress on this topic with your further studies since then?
Um, yes and no. Uh, yes, in the sense that there is some updated understanding on how the climate policy making process works. And if I can draw attention to one thing, it would be the power or the importance of information and how information flows, and seeing democracy as an information network, and as all the participants in the governance process as different nodes in the processing of information.
Mhm.
But as we have seen, there wasn't, unfortunately, a resurgence of youth climate protests, at least not at a meaningful scale. And since we last spoke, and I gave this presentation initially 2 years ago, the emissions have kept rising. Um, I look back at the slides. Back then, I asked the group, what temperature are we heading for, and what's the warming we already um, experienced? And I have to update that number from a warming back then of 1.2 degrees to now 1.3. If you follow the latest science, the Copernicus Institute in Europe, based in Europe, then we've seen, I think, 2 consecutive years of a 1.5 warming. So breaching of that really, really important threshold, which is really dangerous, because like beyond that point, we don't know if there's climate tipping points. And students might have heard of the Gulf Stream, the conveyor belt, bringing warm air and water from the south, from the equator to Europe, and really cold air, and actually really cold water to the south. So if that slows down or breaks down, we could have an ice age in Europe, and that's a real possibility. So yes, um, personal progress and understanding of these processes and what's at stake, but unfortunately, not the major policy breakthroughs, and the civil society push that we might have needed or still need.
Mhm. So the question this time, more than just the climate change, was the importance of democracy and statistics for, for the discussion on climate change and the progress in the programs to cope with climate change. So I would be interested in having you talk about the relationship between democracy and statistics and for information and other kinds of government and statistics.
Yes, fantastic question. So the way I would like everyone to think about democracy, as a governance system, is if you have more, you know, nodes, more people that process information, that try to understand what is the truth, what is the problem, what is the challenge, how can we solve it. You probably know this well. If you ask a group of people, when was, I don't know, Julius Caesar killed? Probably no one will get it right. But if you ask a representative group of people and you take their average, they're probably closer to the truth than any one individual.
Yeah.
So something kind of similar happens at a big societal scale. And democracy is this fantastic mechanism where you can have quite you have the same question asking and hopefully solution finding at the massive scale. So you want to understand. So if democracy wants to understand, is there climate change happening? How dangerous is it? What can we do about it? There's many different institutions that try to and players that try to feed that information, be it science. I mean, this is a scientific institution that gives that information. Very, very important in informing the public, informing people, informing the policymaking process. It's citizens, children that read about climate change, that maybe are affected by hot summers or floods, and can feed that by talking to the representatives, by voting. It's the media, both amplifying the voice of the civil society and hopefully translating science meaningfully and bringing the point across. And then, of course, you have elections, where if a representative doesn't you know
Yeah.
represent or act on climate change, in theory, that person can be replaced. The problem is, however, you have what if the majority of people, like in the example I gave, doesn't actually is really far off when it comes to Julius Caesar's birthday, and because there is so much misinformation, either intentionally or unintentionally, or it's frankly really hard to wrap your head around climate change and how dangerous it is and what you can do and who you would vote for. It could easily happen that the truth is here and everyone thinks the truth is here, and you vote, statistically, then you vote for a party that might not represent the truth about climate change, but just wants to grab power. That's also another thing I would draw students' attention to. You can think of governance mechanisms as a way of mechanisms for truth seeking and for power grabbing, and these are at a bit at opposing ends, because the institutions that create checks and balances um, make it more difficult maybe for science to come through, and a power grabbing person, strongman like Trump, might dismantle the very institutions that
Yeah.
underpin the information processes, to bring truth to the political debate.
Yes.
So you might have a skewed towards untruth, towards not understanding climate change, if you have a political power grab, which unfortunately we see, for example, in the US right now. So that's how I would say how democracy, statistics, and climate change kind of can be fought off in conjunction.
Yes, yes. So, as you say, one problem of dictatorships or very autocratic governments is that they tend to abolish, sometimes even abolish or reduce the function of institutions that gather data, statistical institutions. So, and these are
Right,
very important and they need protection. And one of the good things about democracies is that they in tendency protect those institutions which provide data. So
right.
in Germany, for instance, how would you compare Germany and England concerning, scientific data and the presence of institutions that provide them?
Um, that's an interesting question. I think um, both of them are quite strong. I mean, both of them value, um, you know, education, scientific progress. Uh, I'm in the UK right now. Uh, we, the UK boasts some of the world's most prestigious, most well-esteemed institutions, and that is because they publish in um, very well-regarded journals. And just before giving this talk, I looked up which countries fare best in terms of climate policy, and actually, it's the UK, maybe among all countries in the world that are on track with 1.5. Germany is, I think, on track well below 2 degrees. And Germany also has very strong scientific institutions that are, state funded, and the and much more decentralized. In the UK, there's a few powerful institutions. In Germany, that spread of scientific prowess and yeah, processing of statistical data is more decentralized, which again both has pros and cons. We can talk about that when it comes to governments and their ability to tackle climate change as well, decentralization versus centralization.
Yeah.
But in general, both are still well-functioning democracies, regarding science highly, as by the way can also be seen um, with regards how they tackled the COVID virus, which elevated science, which brought scientific advisors to the core of policymaking, which happened both in the UK and in Germany. But the protection and the regard for scientific knowledge is high in both, which is critical to climate policy making, but to policy making in general.
Do you happen to have any knowledge about the situation in Spain and in Italy? Because we have school students from both countries.
I'm afraid I cannot meaningfully discuss the state of education or higher education in
No, the
those
state of higher
countries.
education, but the state of, data and statistical institutions that are protected by the state that produce data on, climate problems, for instance.
Um, I don't know the institutions well, but in my knowledge, they're still well-functioning democracies trying to tackle climate change. And interestingly, there in those countries you might have other mechanisms at play, which is people are very much affected by flooding and natural disasters, which people connect more and more. Oh, these didn't used to happen in that frequency and with such force before, and this is due to climate change. So that's one of the other mechanisms I was talking about. So science and statistical knowledge is one thing, but political pressure from citizens is another very important aspect. So if those events continue and they'll get more frequent and more severe, likely these sort of frontline citizen feedback loops to set agenda, to impact policymaking, are going to become more and more important than the science itself, because the science has been really clear for decades, but the action has been lagging behind. So that would be my detour
Also,
answer to
what
that
one could see,
question.
young people who are interested in climate, in coping with climate change, etc., will probably also be politically motivated, to choose political directions which foster research on climate change, for instance. So the interest in climate policies may have an influence on political choices, and from those also interest in statistical data. So there is all a
Sure.
chain of interests and information search, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If you have a more um, concerned civil society, they will push for better science, or better science communication, or better use of science. That's a particular interest for me, better use of the science we do have to inform policy, because often we don't need much more new science. The solutions are there. But indeed, the government will then, if people demand this, they will be better at integrating science in the policymaking process, and be better at communicating the science, further informing the public, and then hopefully more and more people and we have a very concerned public, will then demand action. So yeah, that's one of the few positive virtuous cycles that we have in the fight against climate change, for sure.
Uh-huh. Thank you. So one last question. Uh, if you look at countries, as you mentioned, United States, etc., or other countries, China, Russia, etc., do you have the hope that even these countries will eventually tend to come to terms with climate change instead of denying it, as some people do, and
Yeah.
there will be a progress even in those countries, or are you pessimistic?
I am, let's start with the bad news. I'm pessimistic about one country, Russia, and optimistic about the other country, the United States. And I'll make a slight detour. I promised I would integrate insights from Yuval Harari's
Yeah,
recent book Nexus. And the reason why I'm not optimistic about Russia is, in Harari's words, that is a flawed democracy that lacks self-correcting mechanisms. What do I mean by self-correcting mechanism? You have someone, a strong man, that grabs too much power, and that there's either checks and balances, the media that can criticize and speak up, courts that can curtail the power, non-rigged elections that, if people are not happy with a leader, can replace that party or that leader, which is not the case in Russia, because it's not a democracy. And it's not a democracy geared towards truth and prosperity. It's highly geared towards centralizing power as much as possible in the hands of Putin and in the hands of his oligarchy clique. And unfortunately, their business model runs on denying climate change. They have vast oil reserves and gas reserves, which made Europe quite dependent, which made the invasion on Ukraine so economically damaging for Europe as well. And it's interestingly, Russia is one of the few countries, there's only two, that benefit from a warming climate, which is Russia and Canada, because more of the now, Siberia and ice-covered or too cold areas are going to be melting, which means they're open for agriculture. And in the north, towards the North Pole, there might be ports opening up. So I'm unoptimistic about Russia. I'm more optimistic about the United States.
mhm,
We have a weakening of democratic institutions. Um, Donald Trump, as we read unfortunately daily in the news, is acting quite autocratically, uh, attacking the independence of the Federal Reserve, the central bank, ordering essentially the state military to go into cities where there should be the police in charge. He's bringing courts behind his line. His internal party, I read today, still gives him a 90% approval rating, although he has the worst um,
of course.
public approval rating in history, worse than at the end of the Biden administration term. So he is trying to dismantle mechanisms, but I do strongly believe that in, what will it be, 2028, we will have a new American president elected,
Yeah,
and the scientific institutions. Right, that was an important aspect I forgot. Of course, the horrific attack on scientific institutions, withdrawal of funds, the rejection of visas for students. So the scientific enterprise takes a really strong hit. And I know from personal experience and colleagues of mine that work on climate or environmental topics, they're just not allowed to study those topics or won't get professorships, won't get funding. So that's an active
Yeah.
destruction of the scientific institution.
Mhm.
But I think if Trump isn't toppled by then, I think he will be replaced through
Yes,
the regular democratic elections.
there is.
It's unsure if there will be in time to tackle climate change to the temperature limits we hope for, but I think the democratic institutions will prevail.
In the end.
So
Noah, we have to finish our conversation, which is very, very sad. But I would love to have you here in Ludwigsburg soon so that we can continue because we have projects. My colleague Joachim has a project on politics and statistics, for instance, and with students of the two areas. So there is a lot going on, which is interesting for us, but also perhaps for you. And I'm very grateful that you could be with us, at least in this form today.
thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. I love to stay in the loop and to contribute with hopefully in person, but certainly online with new insights also from my soon personal research and fantastic projects that you're putting forward and carrying out in Ludwigsburg. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present some of my work, and I hope it's beneficial for students' understanding of climate statistics and democratic processes.